welcome back to Eldest Immigrant Daughters, a podcast for the parentified siblings like us. I'm Sarisha.
I'm Janet.
And I'm Rose Ingrid.
So in the first episode that we did, you heard a little bit about each of us, including how some of us have moved around the country quite a bit. And I know we've tried to calculate this before, but I always find it so interesting when we chat about it. How many times each of us has moved? So I'm 29 as of this recording, and I've lived in 2 provinces, and I've moved a total of 17 times that I can count.
I've lived in 3 provinces in Canada, and I've moved about 4 times.
Laughing because I did the count, a fresh count before we started recording. I am 37 years old, and I have lived in 3 provinces. Because Quebec is one. Yeah. And I have moved approximately 32 times according to my last count.
Which is insane.
I think you're 17, I had reached by high school, to be honest.
That's wild. I think by high school it was must have been 10.
Yeah, somewhere in there. Because I was born in Alberta, and then I was born 2 months later, we moved to Gatineau. 4 years later, my parents got divorced and we lived in a shelter. Moved from the shelter to the apartment, moved to another apartment, moved to a bigger apartment down the street, and I was 6 years old by then. And about 6 moves. By the time I was 6, it's a lot.
Not just the casual, we moved to a shelter, we moved out of a shelter, the trauma.
Yeah, I just lived in the YMCA downtown. I still remember the green walls and the microwave pasta. Shout out to them for housing women when they need them. No problem. Actually, though, I will say this about moving. I think it's the ACE score, the ACE test about childhood trauma, and how moving is a point on how bad your childhood was, or how impactful your childhood trauma was. And I remember doing this test and be like, I've moved 1,000,000 trillion times. Oh my fucking God. No wonder I'm messed up. So,
or I don't remember what the exact score is, but I'm sure it's the higher amount of times that you've moved, probably the worse you're off. But I don't think that means that if you haven't moved a lot, you haven't experienced traumatic.
Oh God, no. This is the improv of trauma, the improv of life.
Janet, what's it like to not move that much?
I can't comment on moving from homes, but I am an immigrant to the country, so international moving is hard. Now, I can't share advice. The research does show that even if you're not cognizant of the big move, it does have an impact on you.
Of course. That totally makes sense. So you're telling me that your parents still live in the same house that you grew up in?
Yes.
Wow.
Must be nice.
I have a couple of friends who I remember being in high school and my friends oh yeah, my parents have been in the same house all my life. I'm like, what? By then I was at house 7. And I was like, that's so incredible.
You know the kids whose parents measure their heights on the door hinges and stuff? I always wanted that to be my life.
Oh, man.
But anyway, clearly, at least Rose Ingrid and I have moved around a lot. And Janet has had pretty significant moves, even if they weren't in as many numbers. They were countrywide, internationally, and provincially. And Canada is very big. So moving from province to province is not a small thing. It's a big deal. And I found that, at least for me, moving around a lot really messed me up, especially depending on the demographics of where I was moving. As a kid, switching to schools all the time, trying to make new friends, and then having to fit into different communities, especially fitting into white communities. I thought it was really hard to build an identity around where my home was. Not to mention that there's a lot of complexity in trying to find a home on stolen land as people whose ancestors, or even in my case, just my parents, are not even from here. So one thing that I'm wondering is, when you were growing up, what did you consider home to be?
So to me, growing up, where I belonged was never in question, because culturally, between my immediate family, the church community, the cousins, the judgmental aunties and uncles, home as community was always present, and home as the physical space was consistent. It was the same spot. My only lament growing up was I just wish there had been more of us. The Nigerian community living in closer proximity to each other for reasons of urban sprawl, which is a whole other conversation about civic planning. Growing up, I'm embarrassed to say it now, but I did want to be in Toronto because representation matters. And growing up, I knew there was a lot of Black people in Toronto, and that's where I wanted to be. Now, as an adult, no, thank you.
Not the Toronto slander. We've taken enough L's from Kendrick.
It's not our fault your mascot's out here, catching strays every day, looking for beef.
I'm a Montrealer. Let us not forget that. I'll get into that in a minute. I don't claim
Okay,
Toronto.
Georgetown.
But on a serious note, my story of being an immigrant to Canada, my story is not unique because Canada is a land of settlers. Everyone in Canada is from somewhere. Maybe not first generation, maybe not second or even third generation, but unless you are First Nation, Inuit, or Métis, you can't, on a blue-blooded Canadian. I don't even know what that means.
Is that what blue-blooded means, that you're a Tory?
This isn't a political podcast.
Yes, it is. Our whole lives are political. We are the politic. Look at our skin.
Yes, I have done the major moves. I think a lot of people in Canada have done, but I never felt displaced because, again, it was an immigration of choice. If anything, it was more a sense of just wanting to be in closer proximity to the people I knew. But I always knew I belonged here because my community was here. So
Home is complicated for me. For one, I think moving a lot does that to you. And I think home, because of that, was very much connected to like my family, my mother and my brother and I. I will say that in after fourth grade, we moved to a neighborhood, and that's the longest I had lived somewhere. I lived there from fifth summer before fifth grade up until I graduated high school. My mom, day after graduation, bought a house in the suburbs, and we moved right away. And that was, like, I think, one of the times I can really actively remember being sad about moving because, like, I knew my neighbors. We all went to different schools. We're all friends. Like we were like a little, microcosm of the quote unquote Canadian freaking dream. You know what I'm saying? The the Chinese kid and the kids from El Salvador and the kid from Nigeria, whatever. We're all hanging out, and we all grew up together. Like we pretty much all went through our formative years together. And I mean, our doors were open to my friends. They would come in and eat my mom's rice and peas and all that. Or ricotta à pois, if you want to be proper with the technicality of the terms. And so moving to the suburbs was really, really hard. I was only there for a summer before I moved away for school. And it was so stark. The parks were the most beautiful parks I'd ever seen, and they were dead. Like there were basketball courts, and the nets had actual like they had they were straight. They stood tall, and the nets actually had nets on them, and no one was using them. And I'm like, what's wrong with these rich kids?
Why was no one using them?
Because no, they were all at home, or they all played like competitive. They played in good gyms. They had options. Whereas in the neighborhood I grew up in, our net was like always a little lopsided. Sometimes the guys, like the older men, would come through to play, and they would bring a net, and they would need to bring a new one, like every other week. But we would be there till sundown, right? But also, we were in suburbs. Kids can afford camp and babysitters, and like they have things. It was so jarring to me because we would like hear my mom yell from the backyard when it was time to come home, and everyone would hear us, or someone's mother or sibling like, oh, where's so and so? Like we just spent all our time outside, and we used what we had, even if we didn't have much to use it with. We played football in the park, or found some Value Village tennis rackets to play tennis in the tennis courts, even though we didn't know how to play. But these are the nicest parks ever, and they're dead empty. And so it was just and you didn't talk to your neighbors. It was a very weird shift for us. And so I think that's probably the most at home I had felt in the traditional sense. Though I also wrestle with being born on this godforsaken land, to be honest. Like what is it? On n'est jamais maître chez nous, as they say. And I had always really wanted to go back to Haiti, even though I had never been. And my mom had not been back since 1986, before I was born. And she would say that it's not the country she left behind. The country she saw was not the country she left behind. Not Canada's a country now. And that always sat weirdly funny with me, even though I was born here. And we would butt heads on the political aspects of that, because I was like, are we really Canadian? Like, what does that even mean? You know what I'm saying? I was like, when I go to school with my lunches that my mom makes, they don't tell me that. They look at me funny. They tell me my food smells weird. I'm raised in this home where the rules are very much Haitian, and outside the rules are very different. So am I really that Canadian? I don't know. And I remember I went in 2017. I went to Haiti for the first time. I got off the plane, and my body immediately felt like I knew that I was somewhere that I recognized. Like I had never consciously been there, but physically, like I understood that I was fully at home. And it was so cool to see parts of myself I had not noticed. And I was like, oh, because I know if you speak more than one language, you have a different personality in all of them. I'm socialized in English is the language I use with my friends and in my everyday life. So I feel like I'm very much myself in that. French I learned at home first, so I'm much more serious in French because I speak to my elders in French, and I didn't go to school in French. So like grown ups, doctors, school administration at work is so I'm much less myself. I find in French, but showing up, I realized I spoke more Creole than I thought I did because when you have to use it, you're all like, oh, it's actually still there, even though my mom never spoke to us in Creole on purpose. Being in Haiti and being around primarily Creole speakers, I was like, oh, I could totally roll. And also, I'm funny in Creole. Cool, awesome. My personality comes out. Yeah.
How come your mom didn't want to speak to you in Creole?
Well, she's a French teacher for one, and I think also it's the I feel like we're so different now than it was like 30 years ago when it comes out immigrants processed being here. But my mom would go to schools and see how Haitian kids were being treated in school because Creole and French are so close in how they sound. That teachers would mistreat Haitian kids because they spoke quote unquote bad French. And originally the plan was to send me to French school, to lycée. And so she's like, I'm not going to send my kid to go be essentially discriminated against. And so she withheld that from us. She taught us good French, le français de Molière, We read in French. I learned to read it right before I walked into school in French. And I heard Creole in the music and when my mom talked to her family and they spoke to each other, but she never spoke to us in French. And so even now, like a lot of diaspora of my generation and younger will have like their like go-to phrases that their mom used to use with them or how she used to yell at them or even like the fun accents they make, and I don't have those in part because we spoke French at home. I have mixed feelings about it, and I look now because I live with my nieces, and I look at these kids who are like now even more removed from our culture because their mom is not Haitian as well, and I fear that every generation we're here, we become a little less Haitian, and how much of that will be lost.
I relate to that so much because just what you're saying, how your mom saw like discrimination due to like language spoken at home. It's why I don't speak Yoruba. Like my parents clocked that right away and they're like, it was just the question, like, what do they speak at home? Almost a justification that it's just so much as like, I don't know justification of what, just racism is what the answer is. I'm so happy to see a shift, at least in my friends who have kids and kids who speak three languages, none of that inquiry. It's just a sad reality of the times we were growing up.
For sure. And even like, I don't know if you feel this as multilingual folks too, growing up in a place where French and English are both very prominent. Like if people meet me, generally my world is so anglophone, they don't know I speak French until I tell them or they hear it and they go, you don't sound like a Franco-Ontarian. I'm like, because I'm not. And they're like, oh, you don't have an accent in either language. And it's this like thing, again, I think that like we grew up in it, you're proud to not sound like an other. I could come here and you assume an anglophone and we're good. And then in certain French spaces, if it's not all of them, because if I go to Quebecers, they're like, oh, you're clearly not from here. And I'm like, you can fucking eat my shit. I'm gonna tangent for a little moment because I have smoke for French Canadians. You're not gonna sit here when your ancestors got on a fucking boat, stopped by Africa, stole us from our homelands, forced us on a fucking island, raped us, pillaged, forced us into labor, and then gave us your stupid ass language because we would not speak it without you. And now, 400 years later, you're gonna sit here and be like, well, your accent, did you understand me, madame? Tu m'as compris. Okay? Alors mange la merde. You don't get to tell me if I'm francophone or not. You don't. You absolutely don't. And I speak 4 languages. How many do you speak? Oh, what? If you barely speak the one you have, ask the French from France. So miss me with that. All that. Back to what we were talking about.
I speak 2 colonial languages, English and French, and I do not speak any of my mother tongues, which I barely know what they are because apartheid did its job and we don't speak our languages for a multitude of reasons. So the fact that I speak 2 colonial languages while on this stolen land and don't know my mother tongue is so internally shameful for me, but at the same time, it's not my fault. They literally colonized us so many times. I know when people are talking about, oh, the British, this and that. I have smoked for the British, the French, the Portuguese, the Dutch.
Snap, snap, snap.
It wasn't one and done. They came back and forth. Everyone seems to forget the Italians are also colonizers. Anyway, I digress.
It's so real. And like, again, the 3 of the languages that I speak, like one I barely speak is Spanish, is the 3rd one, and it's also colonial tongue. Like, fuck off. The second I can drive myself to Montreal every week, I will go and take a friggin' Haitian Creole class because I refuse to die knowing these other 3 languages better than. And if my French depreciates with time, so be it. One of the things I wrestle with and I catch myself in all of this is I remember I have a friend who's a French Canadian, and once in a while he would be like, "Oh, you sounded really Haitian right then." And I like, again, a lot of times people meet me in English and they just don't know I'm Haitian because I don't sound it. Because people don't associate like Anglos with being Haitian, which is crazy because so many Americans aren't French speaking. But like, there's something in me that I don't know, subconsciously prided herself in like not having an accent and not being findable. And hearing that triggered something in me, and there's like a shame. There's shame because it's like, no, I speak proper, blah 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 blah. Fuck you. But also shame at myself for even feeling that way. Because like, what if I did sound Haitian? I am Haitian, and a Haitian woman taught me French, and a Haitian woman helped me learn English, and also, why does that matter? But like, you're raised to assimilate into these white spaces, and so the fact that you think you can find me out is actually this like negative thing, and it's something that has like haunted me because it goes against my values and my beliefs, and also it doesn't matter, and it should be a point of pride. Accents are just a reflection of where you've lived and where you're from. They're not a bad thing, but I've caught myself feeling a type of way about that.
When you describe that feeling of like being found out, I have to borrow from queer theory and the concept of passing. And to use it appropriately, the idea that you can be in society and pass as the norm, even though the norm is the very reason your existence is oppressed.
All I'd say is home. I don't know where do I belong in community. They give pockets of belonging. You know what I'm saying? Like here with you guys. I definitely found sprinkles of that when I was in Haiti. There's reasons why I don't belong there too. Like I was raised in North America. Also, I'm fucking queer. A pastor was like, "You don't believe in the le mariage pour tout le monde?" While we were there, I'm like, "What? Huh? We were because I was a minister at the time. They're like, marriage for everybody, and we were like, oh, that's what y'all call it here. Yeah, I didn't know I was gay then, surprisingly. And I actually another place I really do feel at home, which I know is sacrilegious, is America. Whenever I cross the border, I breathe a little easier. People look at me like I'm crazy. I'm no longer the only Black person. I'm no longer the loudest. I'm no longer the most direct. Like my way of being is actually the norm. Like no one thinks I'm being rude for just answering a fucking question. It is actually so liberating to walk into a space and go, oh, my like personality is not offensive here. Racism, I know where to find it. I know where to avoid. You're clear with where you stand with me. And I think I have to mask less when I'm in the States. And it's so nice. It's less resistance, I feel, when I'm there, despite their bullshit. And it's something that I know people look at me crazy on both sides of the border every time I say it. Because I'm Black, queer, and I live free healthcare. But to be rid of the British politeness for a little bit is always really nice.
You raised a really good point before, although I will say I think people will give us flack for the whole we're oppressed because our food smells to white people tidbit. But because also, who cares? It was such a big
but when
deal.
you're 6 years old, when you're seven, there are worse things. But I'm also like, I understand being 6 or 7 and like wanting to fit in white spaces, and then you come home with fucking, I have bring in legume and it looks like friggin' mush. Tastes delicious though.
Yeah. No, right? I hear you. And it reminded me, I did a few years ago, there was an exhibit at the Sikh Heritage Museum in BC. And somehow I had an exhibit there, and it was called Desis in the Diaspora. And what I did was take pictures in my house with my family of things we were doing. So like food my mom was making or clothes she was wearing, how we were living inside of the house versus how we presented ourselves outside, and what the stark contrast was of that. Where I grew up made me feel so much shame to be like, oh, we have to hide inside the house, only eat this food inside, and only look like this inside so we can fit in outside with all these white people. But that's what it reminded me of. When I was growing up, my whole identity was wrapped up in being a Quebecer, or specifically being from Montreal. It was my whole identity. And it was because I had moved to Ontario at such a young age. And I always just called Montreal my home. That's where my extended family was, at least those of whom are in Canada. And when I think about it now, after I moved from Brampton, at the time was predominantly like Jamaican and North Indian Punjabi, to Georgetown, which is all, when I was there, all white people and like 3 of us, maybe me and my siblings and like 2 other families. It seems kind of odd now, but there really was this I must hate Ontario and I must hate Toronto energy. And this is how I'm going to separate myself. Toronto sucks and I'm from Montreal and Montreal is better. And like, yay, Quebec.
It feels like you knew that you were different. So at the very least, you were going to be different for something that was distinctly Canadian.
Yes, exactly. And I don't think I had the language or understanding to recognize that's what was happening at the time. But I think partially because of all the racism that I was experiencing and because I didn't have the brain capacity to understand that. So my attempt to distance myself from being this brown girl was to be, oh, I'm from Montreal and we love hockey and we're so much better than you. Like the Montreal Canadiens are amazing. And in these small white Canadian towns, that is what is popular.
It's so interesting, the idea of like, if I join into your stuff, then you'll ignore my brownness and my otherness, and that I'm a Quebecer like the rest of you. And I feel like that's also the only way people of color are successful in Quebec culture. Is particularly.
And the irony was I was doing all this in Ontario, though. Yeah. But I had a teacher at one point back when there were talk about like, oh, do we need another referendum? Like there always is every so often. And she was like, if you get deported back to Quebec, like that's where you're going to have to go because you're not a Canadian, you're a Quebecer. And I'm like, well, my birth certificate says Quebec. So I think I just felt this need to be like, I'm not from here and I'm separate from what you're doing and I can't yet fight against the racism in ways that I can now. So what I'm going to do is say that it's like Montreal versus Toronto. And even though I grew up in the GTA for most of my life. But something also really weird that used to happen, and I think looking back now, I know now that I understand I have anxiety and stuff that that's obviously what it was because this is where I felt at home. But when I was a kid and we would go back into Montreal to visit family and stuff, the minute we crossed the Quebec border, I literally felt like I could breathe cleaner air. I felt like I was like my asthma was gone. I really felt like I could breathe again. And now I know it was my body's way of telling me that I'm at ease and I feel relaxed and I feel comfort and I feel at home, especially because Montreal is where I had my first formative years. It's where my family migrated to. I also went back as an adult for university. It's where I've met my closest friends. It's where my grandparents are buried. So I always have this deep connection there still. And I still call it home. I live in Ottawa now. I wouldn't say the GTA is my home, even though I did grow up there. I'd still say Montreal is my home. The connection we feel to these lands that we've settled in still kind of feels a little bit disingenuous in some ways because there's limitations to it. We're not actually from here. And while we might live here now and all this colonialism is around us and still happening, like the impacts of it are still happening today, ongoing genocide, ongoing colonialism is a thing. Our roots are really still elsewhere. They're not here. And in the last episode, I know Janet said she knows exactly where she's from and we were joking about it. But for someone like me, that's a joy and a connection to home that I'll never have. And so I guess I'm just wondering, how has knowing where you're from and understanding your identity in this way shaped where you kind of feel like you're at home now, Janet?
I never felt like an alien, if I can use that word. I knew where I was from. I knew Canada's out there and, Nigeria is in here. So that was clear to me. Like you guys are you were talking about provincial borders. Dude, the border was at my front door. So home is like heading home and leaving home and heading into Canada. Okay. School day's done. Leaving Canada, heading home. As I said earlier, for me, being surrounded by the community, surrounded in my culture. So at the church, we didn't always wear traditional clothing, like, cause it's for special occasions. But what you were saying, like being Desi at home and okay, being Nigerian on the weekends. Being Black on the prairies is a unique experience, and it's not what people think it is. Growing up ethnic in the prairies was actually really common, especially just because it's where they sent all the ones they didn't want, The multiple waves of immigrants landed in the prairies. So someone was always from somewhere. And I will say that till I'm blue in the face.
All these blue jokes that you keep making. Blue blood, blue in the face.
Y'all.
But anyway, what I was going to say is I didn't know there were that many ethnic people in the prairies.
So if you'll indulge me for a minute, Canada's multiculturalism, like as a core part of our identity, actually comes from Winnipeg. Paul Yuzik was a child of Ukrainian immigrants. And at the time, I think it was around the 1970s, Canada was very centered around being French or English. but like, what about the Polish people? What about the Ukrainian people? What about, the Italian, like everyone else that's here? So for him, it was about expanding it. And Manitoba today, like I feel at home when I hear Tagalog on the street. I feel at home when someone gives me some homemade pierogies. I feel at home when, I see the aunties rolling up. Like Winnipeg is actually really diverse. Shout out to my hometown. What was weird growing up was I knew I was Black, but I wasn't Black American. But all we had was Black American. And so part of
Fair.
why I wanted to be in Toronto was because it was the closest to Black American. And I didn't know how to explain to the other kids who were like, being kids, making fun of me, making slave jokes, whatever. Like,
What? Pause. What?
oh yeah. If you're getting bullied and they're like, well, your people were slaves. And I just remember someone said that to me and I didn't have a rebuttal because I was confused. Because I was like, no, we came from Africa. I didn't understand. I don't say that to disassociate myself from being a Black woman in North America. I say that to acknowledge the fact that Black American culture is distinct. And it was growing up, it was hard to find space being a Black African. And times have changed, thank God. Now it's becoming more clear, like, yeah, we're a tiny country in terms of population. We don't have anywhere near the same number of absolute diversity. But being a Black Nova Scotian is not the same as being Black from Toronto. It's not the same as being Black in the prairies. Like, truly, as much as I am, like, my identity as a Nigerian is deeply informed by growing up in the prairies. Because all the Nigerians are there.
Y'all are everywhere.
By the grace of God, we are everywhere.
We talk about a lot, and I think Rose Ingrid and I have touched on this quite a bit just in like our regular conversations. But I find it so interesting. One, I mean, the multiculturalism you were talking about was the multiculturalism of a bunch of white people.
I wasn't saying it was perfect. Okay, I'm just saying the language that we use. Okay,
the diversification of the whites into the prairies is the history Janet was sharing. And this is why I maintain that Toronto might be diverse, but Montreal is multicultural.
100%.
In Toronto, everyone is still siloed in ways. Like, in Scarborough is the Tamilians, in Brampton is the Punjabis. I'm just speaking from like my own, South Asian background, those communities. Now, downtown Toronto might be a little bit more close knit, and so the diversity looks more obvious. But I maintain that Canadian multiculturalism only exists in Montreal through forced assimilation because we're forced to go to French schools. And so you have a bunch of people who are divided by linguistic differences, and everyone speaks multiple languages. So like my family, for example, everyone who was born in Quebec went to French school for the most part. And my family is also very interracial. So they speak whatever their parent who is from there that married into the family speak, and they speak French. And if there's another language, they also speak it. So everybody speaks almost 3 languages. So like I speak English that I spoke at home, French that I learned in school, and then Hindi, but I learned not my home language, like not my mother tongue, but I learned from being at home and engaging in Indian cinema and stuff. In Montreal, at least, everybody is like that. And so it's a very different culture than in Toronto. But anyway, that was my spiel.
No, I think we talk about it because I moved to Toronto in 2017, and I remember like being like, oh yeah, moved to Toronto, diversity, leaving the whites behind. And it took a long time to find people because actually, if you're not working at it, I was surrounded by white people anyway, going to school for the most part. And because of where I was living too, I actually was surprised I had to like look for Black folks. I had to look for folks of color and find out where they hung out, because if you're not hanging out in the right spot, you're not going to hang out with them. Whereas I will say we're no Montreal and Ottawa, and we are predominantly white city. But like, I feel like I grew up, I think it's class impacted where we lived more than anything. And I grew up in neighborhoods where, again, the Italian kid and the Chinese kid and the Ugandan kid and the Haitian kid were all in the same neighborhood, playing in the same park, going to the same schools, eating each other's food in each other's backyards all the time. And it was super normal, which I appreciate for the neighborhoods I lived in. I think because we were in the lower middle class to poor spectrum, there just happens to be more diversity in those spaces. And so you kind of grew up around different vibes and sounds and people because we're all kind of broke.
Yeah, and broke because of colonialism
I
and
mean,
racism.
you know why,
And this is
right?
why we were all gathered here today. In fact.
And then, when I moved to the suburbs, I saw one other black family and they were mixed. And she was so weird. That lady was crazy. Anyway.
Yeah. And the GTA, this is the thing. The GTA, again, is diverse. When I was in Brampton, and I was speaking patois, and I'm very sorry, I apologize.
You're doing your best Lily Singh.
Oh my.
You should have leaned into it and gotten rich, girl.
I was growing up with, there was an occasional white kid, but the white kids were speaking Punjabi. I wasn't even speaking Punjabi, and the black kids were speaking Punjabi. And so Brampton, for example, is sort of a multicultural place in that sense. But there's parts of the GTA that are just not. Like when I grew up in Georgetown, it was all white people. And when I first got there, one of the first things people said to me is, why do you speak like you're black? And then when I would go back to Brampton to visit my friends, they'd be like, why do you sound white? I was like, I'm neither of these things, but okay. So it's a different identity that exists in the GTA. So I can see why you'd be like, I want to go to Toronto to be around black people and be around black culture, because that's what dominates it. Even though people want to pretend like it's just Toronto slang or London slang or whatever. All of these things are influenced by the Caribbean.
Yeah, it's Jamaicanese folk.
What I wanted to ask, because I think what Janet was saying about like being deep rooted in community and still being connected to your culture, like in your home, is really important. And I was wondering, how many times have you gone back home? Like, have you at all? Is that something you desire to do?
You're talking going back home to to Nigeria. I haven't.
My plan is to buy property back in Haiti and to die there. Bury me under a mango tree next to the ocean. That's the plan.
How many times have you gone back?
Only one. I went in 2017, and then I've been wanting to go back since. And then life happens, because life is the way that is, and I'm not made of money. And now I would love to go back, but I'm like, no one is flying into the country right now. Literally. I've told the kids, like my nieces and nephew all know, like they like, we want to go. I'm like, we're gonna make sure you go, because we're not going to repeat this thing. Like I literally celebrate Flag Day with my family and make Flag Day waffles and like print out like picture coloring sheets of Toussaint Louverture so they can remember, no matter how long you've been on this land, that we're not from here.
That's so cute. We should do that together.
Oh yeah. I remember the first Flag Day when I was living with my nieces and nephew. I like made blue and red waffles for Flag Day waffles. I got blue and red balloons and made like balloon flags, and then we set up an altar, and like everyone had to bring something to put on the altar that reminded the people that they no longer, or that they miss, or something like representative. They were young, so like they didn't fully get it, and then we like painted revolutionary pictures and went to a local Haitian restaurant and got Haitian food. And then at the end of the day, we sat around the altar and talked about like remembering our ancestors, and someone talked about the cat that died that they miss and all that stuff. But like just a reminder of like we have connections to home. On my birthday, I like to like make a meal, put a dish on the altar and have breakfast and be like, can we hang out? Like after I'm finishing eating with the ancestors, you can completely talk to me afterwards. I like the idea of that we're living ancestors. And so I'll be like, hey, one day I won't be here. Make pancakes. I make them pancakes. I make them breakfast a lot. So like you can make pancakes or bake cookies and put them out, and I'll be there.
That's so beautiful, Rose Ingrid. Sarisha, have you gone back home, and how many times?
It feels weird saying back home in some ways, because I was born here and because technically my ancestors are not from South Africa itself too. But I've gone back once when I was 2 years old. I haven't been since. I would love to go back. My family is like waiting for us to come back there. But yeah, I've only been once. I don't really have any memories of it. My mom does always tell this story though, and this is how I know I can't live there, I'm far too westernized, is that when I was there, they didn't have a bathtub the way we would here. I'm used to taking bucket baths. Even in Canada, when we were kids, our parents would give us bucket baths. But the bathrooms there, at least for like my family, cement floor kind of a thing. And I guess I was a little bit too bougie for that, to the point where they had to take me to a neighbor's house to give me a bath because I refused at the age of 2 to take a bath in this bathroom. And I'm sure my mom was very embarrassed, but they tell this story all the time.
You've been a bad bitch since birth.
I am allergic to any metal that is not at least 18 karat gold. And I know other Daisies will be like, so am I. I don't care if this is an ethnic thing. This is a me thing. But anyway, yeah, I've been back once. I would love to redeem myself.
Should we
black.
do an EID Dirty December one year?
We should explain explain to people what that is who don't know.
In December, it's like between like Christmas and New Year's is party central in certain spots in Africa, and folks go to party. Apparently, though, Ghana's been Americanized because the Americans keep coming and ruining the vibe. So the new vibe is in Cape Town and in Nigeria, I think, apparently. So
Please don't ruin Cape Town before I can get there.
stop telling them to come here, because it used to be apparently before the pandemic, the folks who did come from America or the UK would come and like do it like the locals. It was really when the locals went out and partied. There was a whole like festival vibe or whatever, and it was apparently it was immaculate. The vibes were perfect, and now the bottle service culture of Western clubbing has infiltrated the mainstream, and the costs are too high, so the locals aren't going there. So they're going to other countries. So I'm like, let's go to South Africa. Let's go. I'm down.
Here's the thing. Everyone wants to go to Cape Town. It's beautiful, this and that. People don't understand South Africa. Okay? Like, there are rules you have to follow. Just like anywhere. There's places you want to go, this and that. But, like, it actually is dangerous in a lot of places. Like, I have family who've been held at knife point, like, more than once, hijacked, all these different things. Like, you actually do need to be careful, though. And if you're all these white people going willy-nilly, first of all, don't ruin my country. Second of all, if they're going to do there what they did in Ghana, it's not going to fly.
No, for the record, it's mostly Black diaspora coming in, but they're also bringing American whatevers into
Don't bring
place.
American bullshit to South Africa, please, I beg you. Tyler, stop them.
Look, what you're talking about, like the serious safety concerns, Rosingrid, I love that you've been, had the opportunity to go. I have not had that opportunity just because everyone in my immediate family, my extended family, I grew up here, so they're like, look, you go back, they're gonna clock you as a foreigner, and there's real danger. Kidnapping is an industry in Nigeria.
Look, I hear you, and I will tell you, I've heard the exact same things about Haiti. My aunt, I remember I was in like junior high, and one of my aunts was like, "Oh yeah, I heard a story about this guy who went to the bank and he put the money in the cereal box to camouflage it, of course, and deposited it, or went to the bank to go get some money, and the banker called the robbers outside, and then they jumped him and stole his cash." Or like, "Oh, we had a cousin who came to Canada to become a doctor to help his country, and he went back and he got off a plane and they shot him dead." All my life, don't go there. It's violent. It's dangerous. Bro, I had the best time. Everywhere is dangerous if you don't know where to look and if you don't know how to behave. You know what I'm saying? Even here, there are places here where I've seen people get shot, but I also know to mind my fucking business. Don't dress like a tourist. Leave your jewelry at home. Leave your brand name clothes at home. Make sure you have a contact on site. Don't be nosy. I've traveled with white people. I'm like, why are you doing that? Stop being nosy. You can get a shot. I was in New York with a friend once, and I'm like, no. That we are not to talk to drug dealers about the drug dealing. That's how you get killed in these streets. Ugh. Anyway, but I will say that I think that this fear that our parents and our elders have about going home, I understand it. But I think there's also people go to Nigeria every fucking day. People live there every day. And though you're not from there, if it's something that you want to do, I think there's actual ways for you to go safely and go have an incredible experience. Because I think there's something about physically standing on the land that your ancestors are from that nothing can be replaced with. Too often, I feel like our parents, in their desire to protect us, keep us from, same way that they didn't give us the language, keep us from experiences that I think would actually benefit us. Trips home, baby. I'm for them.
Yeah, here's the thing. I really do want to go back home. And the thing is, it's not like the people here that are telling me not to go. It's the people that are there that are telling me this is what you need to look out for when you get here. But I want to go back home, not to go do a tourist thing and be like a visitor. Like, I want to go be amongst my people in what is supposedly my land, except that it's still not my land. Like, I'm still disconnected from my land and culture, even though for me, I feel most connected to being South African. I can't ignore that, like, my ethnic makeup is Indian, and India is hella anti-Black. And so I'm not considered, like, my family are not considered non-resident Indians or overseas Indians because we're too many generations removed. So we don't count as being Indian. The Indian government does not want us. And in South Africa, South African Indians, because of apartheid, a lot of them are still also anti-Black, because of this racial segregation and all these ongoing impacts that exist. So how do I then go to Black country that my family cultivated the land for at some point, right? But still doesn't belong to me. Like, I'm not it's Indigenous land to other people, you know? So I'm a settler here, and then I feel like I'm a visitor or a guest there, even though like my ancestors toiled that land.
This is where, regardless of where home is for you, respect for the land that you're in comes in. I am so proud to say that I grew up on Treaty 1 territory. It's not fair for you to like say that, like, do I have a right to go home to a land that isn't even ancestrally mine? Because you have so much respect. Like, teach me so much. Like, you're so generous with your knowledge about South African culture and you're so patient. And I think for a lot of people on Turtle Island, going back to what I said earlier, like everyone is from somewhere, the best thing you can do wherever home is, learn about the Indigenous people in that land. Learn respectfully, learn, in community, if it is accessible to you, and learn patiently.
I have to always recognize that the land my family, my extended family, where my parents come from and everything is the kingdom of the Zulu. That's where they live, KwaZulu-Natal. And now I live on currently unceded Algonquin territory, but I grew up in Jojage in Montreal I have family who live near Ganawake. I grew up in Huron territory when I was in Ontario. And the reason why it's so important for me to make these connections is because the way that Canada created this system of racism and colonialism and settler colonialism in particular also supported the model for apartheid. And for me to have to feel all the time that I have to like qualify my South Africanness, so to speak, and always say that I'm like ethnically Indian because of apartheid, unlike people who came from the indentured diasporas in like Mauritius and Fiji or Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad, etc., because they're all sort of amalgamated culturally now, they don't have the same experience that we do of like literally being racially segregated up until the year before my birth, right? So like I was the firstborn outside of that system in a different country in my family. Meanwhile, like all these white colonizers are still in South Africa. They own 80% of the land and they claim being African all the time as their identity. They literally have ownership over it. If you look at the Olympics or something, I always complain that it's a sea of white people. How is that even possible? But meanwhile, I have to sit here and be like, oh, I feel some type of way about claiming being African or being South African, even though that's all I know. That's how many generations my family has been there. I can't tell you where I'm from in India, but I can tell you exactly the street where my family has lived for however many years in South Africa. And so, yeah, apartheid took a lot from us. We don't have our language. I don't have any Hindu cultural knowledge. I'm trying to bring that back in. The food is different than in India in some ways and similar in other. Like I said before, I only learned Hindi from watching like Indian films, cinema films in particular. All of that stuff has been stripped away to the point where I have to constantly qualify and question where that home is for me. Even if I say home is in South Africa, someone will be like, but it's not, because you're like, it isn't really. It's not my land.
And I mean, like, in that same breath, you could say the same about me. Like, we made our name for ourselves on that land, but the Tainos were there before us, right? Like Hispaniola, where Haiti and the Dominican Republic is the land of the Taino. And and Tainos you see them in Puerto Rico and all over the Caribbean. But like, ask me where in Africa we're from, right? And the story of who I am that I know, like, and I think there's parallels there in some ways, Sarisha, like, is the story of these enslaved people who were multitudes of tribes who worked with indigenous people on that land to, whatever, and who revolted and who made a name for themselves and who helped liberate, Latin America and Black folks around the world in many ways. And so, and you could argue technically that, Hispaniola is not ours. And I'm like, okay, say less. But also, this is the only home we know. We still there. We're suffering there. And also, we be suffering there in the name of justice, truly. Like, I say this all the time. Like, do not feel sad for Haiti. Do not cry for Haiti. Get mad. Get angry. Because Haiti is not poor because they lack resources. On the contrary, they're not poor because they lack political education. On the contrary, plenty of your faves have been learning from the Haitians. Chicago was founded by a Haitian man. Plenty of the American Revolution would be nothing without the Haitian Revolution. Like, I just read your books. Be mad because the reason why we are still struggling is because the colonial system saw what we did and said, hell no, will we let any more Black people think they have agency? If we trade with the Haitians who already know how to cultivate the land and how to work, why are we not wealthy? We were free and knew how to work the land and how to trade sugar cane and all these things, and yet no one wanted to trade with us. Why? Heaven forbid we treated the cattle like people. Maybe then our cattle will think they're people too. We can't have that. The British, the French, the Americans. And the same reason why we're punishing Palestine today. It's the same shit. Because if indigenous people on their lands have agency, then oh my fucking god, maybe the Mohawk and the Algonquin and will also think they have agency, and then we all lose the plot. And I hope you lose one day. I will be first in line to help you lose. That
No, preach.
Canada is my home because I was born here. I am nationally Canadian on paper, whatever the fuck that means. Okay, hello Hudson Bay Company on crack. I stand by it. But at the end of the day, my allegiance, even though I know there's anti-blackness in indigenous communities across this country, and I'm like, so be it. It's part of colonialism. But at the end of the day, should there be a call to arms, I will be on your side. Because who am I to not be? My people did the same thing for their own liberation, and we're still paying for it too. And I don't know. And again, of course, there's tensions in there too for you, Sarisha, because you're like not black, you're not African. But I think that there's room for you to be part of that story of that land because you are, right? And that is home. And I mean, home is complicated. We all know that in our homes of origin.
On the topic of indigenous resistance, I think it's wild that I see so many people of color who are against indigenous resistance.
Yo,
please be for real.
Zionistic POCs is black people who stand with Israel are wild to me. My Haitian ass could never. I'll be like, you know, your people chopped off heads for freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
My ancestors would have been called terrorists too.
On Twitter, that girl who was like, "Do you guys think decolonization is essays and jokes?" Like,
no, but I think people forget what revolution requires. We have a very short memory. It wasn't that long ago the Americans also shed some blood.
And this is the thing. South Africa is 30 years old. You know what I mean? I'm a year younger than that country. The Republic has only existed for so long. We're still healing all these wounds, and now we're healing them in the diaspora. But there's just, maybe it's just an internalized thing. Maybe it's a me thing. But it just is so annoying sometimes and so heartbreaking in a way that I just constantly have to be like, proving where I'm from. Meanwhile, some of these neo-colonial Indians who are in, I won't go on a whole rant about this, but these neo-colonial Indians who went to Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania are freely saying they are Kenyan, Ugandan, and Tanzanian when their families went and built some businesses after XYZ amount of time. I see you. I know who you are. Those are not my people. Those are not my people. My people were in the sugarcane plantations. Those businessmen are not my people. You want to talk about the colonization of Africa? I have plenty to say, but anyway.
I mean, look, I think you need to figure out what feels at peace and like with you and your values. But from where I'm sitting, I don't know if it matters for what it's worth. And please don't shoot me. Don't fire me in the comments, okay?
Oh, the South Africans come out for everything. Have you seen them on TikTok?
I have. I'm fully on South African TikTok now. Shut out cousins. I saw that lady, the Nepo baby lady who was acting crazy on the plane. I saw that. Oh.
Yeah.
She's like, do you know who I am? I'm like, Miss Ma'am, you threw a drink in the flight attendant's face. Sit your ass down. I don't know how you didn't get knocked out.
South Africa.
And you're not claiming to own it. You're not, but like you're part of that. Claim home. You know, and if haters want to hate, let them hate. What are they gonna do?
I spend a lot of time trying to curate a connection, I guess, or foster a connection in some ways. And I'm wondering like how you both do the same. For me, it's more one, the spirituality aspect of it, because I identify as a Christian, but only a generation ago, my family were Hindus and like very staunch Hindus, I might add. But my mom had an arranged marriage. But when she came to Canada, like my dad and my grandma just took out all of her god lamps and stuff and they just threw it out. Quite literally violently stripped her of her, what in the West we would call religion, of the Vedic tradition and stuff, and forced her to convert into Christianity. And that's what she raised her kids with, because they didn't believe in, like a multi-faith household. You just follow what your husband wants. And so re-inviting that into my life, listening to Hindu bhajans, having mantras, and even having like statues in my home while still like holding on to my Christian identity is something that helps me maintain that connection. And I really want to go to the temples in Durban where my mom used to go and stuff. Yeah, and I've learned Hindi, like I said, which isn't really my mother tongue, but I'm starting to learn some Zulu so that when I do go to South Africa, I don't sound like an idiot. They don't have Tamil and Telugu on mainstream language apps, so I can't actually learn like my own mother tongues and stuff. And then I'm a very political person, so I'm always watching like the politics of South Africa, the rise of fascism in India, and that connection again between South Africa and Canada and white supremacy is something that's constantly on my mind. So those are kind of the ways that I try to maintain that connection.
Well, you know what? Thank God for YouTube trying to learn some Yoruba phrases. Like I know the basics, so I know how to maintain the cultural norms of respect, which are important. I like to surprise people with, throwing in a phrase or two in Yoruba. I'm not saying it's great. I'm just saying I'm trying to self-teach. I'm approaching it with curiosity and grace because Yoruba people have existed since time immemorial. We have our own mythology. I learned Greek mythology, I learned Roman mythology. I'm self-teaching myself Yoruba mythology when Beyonce dropped was playing around with the orishas. I was like, that's cool. That's my culture. you know? So if Miss Beyonce can play around with it, like y'all, like do you, okay? Everyone, the Orishas are Yoruba culture, just so you know. It's not Beyonce culture.
Out here
Yeah.
invoking the queen bee.
I maintain that The Gift is the best album, and maybe it's because it just has all those South Africans and also Nigerians on it, but I digress.
Mission complete.
Like I told y'all on the first episode, you hear our music, you see our iconography, okay? When I tell you we are everywhere, you are welcome.
Yo, that new Burna Boy track? Bundles? Bundles on bundles on bundles? I'm excited.
All I know is he's dating Chloe now.
I'm gonna buy some bundles and then use it for TikTok. It's funny because you're talking about spirituality and growing up Christian. I think that Christianity robbed so many of us of our culture. I stand by it. Like fuck Western Christianity. I stand by that. Telling us that we are cursed. I heard from the pulpit that Haitians were cursed, and that's why we were poor. Which is, and it was actually leaving faith that was like, wait, who told me that voodoo was bad? Who told me that this work was bad? Who told me that, and who benefits from it? Was a huge thing as I started decolonizing and deconstructing my faith. Be like, okay, let me approach voodoo from a non-colonial Western white person mindset, from a non-shame mindset, and what can I take from me? And so like altar work, but I will also say that altar work, part of that was hanging out with other Latinos, friends from Venezuela and other places there too. There's some spaces I think I have strong memories of, like the Mystic Soul Project, which is no longer a thing, but when it started, meeting folks who were from different ethnicities and backgrounds who had either were Christians or were no longer Christians, but also were doing the work of bringing in their like their ancestral spirituality into their lives, and I had just never seen that, not in a way that was celebrated. And so I feel like spending time with other folks who were doing their ofrendas and seeing that too, and I'm like, oh, and it tied me back to my childhood when my mom had altars in her living room that she never taught me about, but she'd be like, "There's food here, you're not allowed to eat it." She had rituals that she never taught us, but she did, and so being able to have the openness to receive that into my life without judgment and shame has been huge. I'm slacking on my practices right now. I will say, I since the last couple moves, I have not reset up my altar, and it's probably not to my benefit. So those are things that I think for sure help me stay grounded. I listen to music that we grew up listening to more now that I'm older. I'm out here just being a stereotypical auntie. You know what I'm saying? I'm making playlists. I'm dancing with my broom in the kitchen, cause like a good Caribbean auntie out here doing compa with my broom. And it's interesting too, and I don't know for you too who still practice Christianity. I know that when I was super Christian, one of the ways I mitigated feeling not at home was looking to heaven. I even wrote a full poem about it. I spent a lot of times in my 20s being like, I'm not at home on this earth, but my home is in heaven. And that was like um my I don't know. I see a little disassociation in there now for sure, and life is hard, and so in heaven life won't be hard anymore, and that theology around that really was something I held on to when I was a Christian. Still have to face my shit, which is no fun, but transitioning away from that, I think it's been interesting in the years since then to be like, okay, if heaven's not home, what's home? you know, because I don't believe in heaven per se. If what is home and how do I build home spiritually and physically, and I don't know if I have all the answers to that yet, you know? It was much easier when I had a clear faith.
Eldest Immigrant Daughters is a podcast hosted by Janet Akins, Rose Ingrid Benjamin, and Sarisha Iyer. Production and editing by Sarisha Iyer. Cover art by Serena Iyer.